Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video, I will be talking about Jade City by Fonda Lee, the first book in the Greenbone saga. And this is one I had been dreading reading this for a bit because I was really afraid I wasn't going to like it just because of some of the things I'd heard it compared to. Just kind of the description in general too, where it's a bit more urban fantasy and kind of like gangster type stuff. So not really my normal quite cup of tea, but I'd heard a lot of good things about it. I know a lot of people really love it, so I was interested to try it and find out for myself. And it won the very close race for the voting for my March TBR, and so I of course had to read it here in March. And I was pleasantly surprised that I did end up liking this overall. So I came at about, and I don't usually start with star ratings, but I came about to a 3.5 stars is where I went with this. It was rocking a 3 for the most part because it really took a while for things to get going. But I thought by the end it had pulled me in a little bit more, and so this will be one I'll be interested to continue. I'm not sure when I'm going to get to book 2, but I do plan to continue it. So this tells the story of the Call family. It's mostly who we are following. So we have, as the story starts, basically like the patriarch, the grandfather who has passed over leadership of the clan, which is very much like a gang, more but like mafia style like family basically, to his oldest grandson Lan. And then we also have Hilo, who is he's the fist, so he's kind of like the leader of the fighters, whereas Lan's the pillar who's in charge. We're introduced also to their sister Shay, who is coming back after being in a different country, studying and kind of trying to leave that life behind. And then we also follow a little bit Andon as well, who's kind of like a cousin. I don't think they're technically related, but for the sake of the story, the family basically treats him as a cousin, like they had partially raised him. We do have a couple of other minor things, but those are the main things we're finding, the main things we're following, and that's kind of what we're looking at here. So we're introduced into this world where we find out that years ago there was a war with another country, basically, and the people in this country ended up winning their independence basically through mostly guerrilla war. And it's this place, the country, and I am drawing a total blank on the name of the actual country at this point. It's Kikon, because they're Kikonese. So okay, I'm like, am I already really going to draw a blank this early? But so and basically it's here. This is the only place that Jade can be mined, and Jade is something that has magical potential basically. But there's a few interesting things with how Jade can be used. Not everybody can use it. There are some people who are naturally immune to Jade, and also it's said that only the people who are actually from this country are able to really use it without major side effects, because there are side effects, so there's a cost for the magic. Too much Jade or too much exposure to Jade can kind of like make you sick and or crazy. You go through withdrawal. If you have your Jade on, you take it off. So there's all kinds of different things, and it sets up some interesting bits with how Jade works. But this really, I was expecting more of the gangster kind of stuff from the description, and the fact that it's like teasing that there's unrest between the clans, and there's also foreign powers who are interested. Really though, this first book focused quite a lot on setting up the story, setting up not just the kind of the turmoil between the clans, but also the whole kind of geopolitical situation. So we learn a lot about Kikon. We learn a lot about kind of how what the history of the clans is, how everything got to where it is now. This is a place that used to be smaller, but now is kind of turning into a bustling metropolis because technology and advancements are coming in now that they're not so closed off from the rest of the world. They're very powerful because of the fact that only their warriors can really effectively use Jade, but other countries want to find ways that they can use it. So there's controlled on exports and how much of it's sold. And Jade really is not only a magical item, but it's a status symbol as well. So the strongest warriors have more Jade. If you kill somebody in a duel, you take their Jade and go on from there. And so really getting that all set up. And I think the setup does well, and it's not unheard of or even unexpected by any means for book one of a trilogy to be doing quite a lot of setup. So for me, the first pretty much half of this book, I really had no strong feelings. I was reading, I wasn't disliking it, I wasn't overly liking it, it was fine. So for me, the pacing definitely was a little bit odd, just because we would go from like, oh, here's a gang war, fighting in the street, there's a drive-by shooting, and then we're following another character as they are auditing financial receipts and looking like following an accounting trail and doing some research. And so what it's all setting up, I can kind of see what's trying to be set up, so it didn't really bother me that much. But this one definitely didn't have as much action. I've heard the second book, it's also called Jade War, has quite a lot more action. And I'm guessing based on the titles alone and not a whole lot else, we have this one, Jade City. The book, the focus really seems to be learning about the city. The second one, Jade War, feels like that's really going to be the action one. And then the third book, Jade Legacy, just once again based on the name, sounds like that's going to be kind of like the aftermath and seeing what happens. So this does have the potential to be a really interesting and complete arc, because of the fact that we're starting with the outset. We're not jumping straight into the action. We're doing a lot to make sure to set up a bigger story. So I will be interested to see what Fonda Lee does with this, because there was some interesting setup. The same thing with the plot, the characters, nothing really drew me in that much. I will say, though, there was a specific character. I don't know if it counts as a spoiler to say so, I guess, but the specific character for me that had the best growth and kind of had some more depth was Hilo. Hilo starts out as seeming like a very shallow character, and then you kind of get to learn more about the character and see the character growing throughout the story. So I think I remember hearing that a lot of people hated Hilo and then ended up really liking the character later as they were more relevant. So I didn't, like I said, I didn't really have any strong emotions, but I thought Hilo's character development was handled really well. A lot of the other characters they had some familiar traits, but I don't feel like we dug in quite a lot to them. So I'm interested to see more if we're going to dig into more of the characters. Not to say that the characters were particularly shallow, they just weren't particularly deep either. This book, like I said, really felt like it was getting everything set up and getting ready to do more, but for me, it didn't really dive in particularly deep into any one thing. The ending of it definitely sets up some big things for what are going to be happening, and there were some action sequences, and there definitely was a plot that was moving forward, but a lot of it just kind of felt also oddly still at times, where, like I said, we'd have some action, we'd have some things going on, but then we're slowing down because we're going to talk about politics or be looking at how the Jade council works, and they've got to go talk to the politicians and everything like that. And so there's a lot of this kind of mix. I do think that's intentional, like I said. I think part of that's just the way the book's described, because nobody ever talks about the geopolitical aspects of this book that I've heard. It's always like, oh, it's gangsters with Jade and martial arts and all that kind of thing. And so I think part of it's just the way that it's described. I was expecting something very different, a lot more action heavy for sure. But I think part of it too is, even though that's what I was expecting, I got a more balanced book. It was definitely on the slow side and was doing a lot more setup, but it wasn't just trying to tell like a stereotypical, mafia type story. It was doing a lot of work to set this up as a unique world and to really explain to you how this works and what the consequences of these things are for it. So you get a lot of description into Jade. For example, you learn a lot about down to why they use the weapons they do. You learn different stories and mythology around Jade, that kind of thing. You learn a little bit more about the wars and what the political situation is in the entire region. So it really is trying to set a lot up. So I think this is definitely, this is one of those books that I did like it. Like I said, the ending pulled me in a lot more. The back half in general, I felt like pulled me in a lot more than the first half. So that bumped it up to a 3.5. This would definitely be one where the second book will need to really kick it up a notch, though, for me to stay pulled in. because this book didn't really, like, I wasn't wild about this book, but I also didn't dislike it. And I think because of the fact that I was expecting to dislike it, I was actually pleasantly surprised by the fact that I did have a good time with this. So a couple other things I'll say is it does start out, and right off the bat there's a comment that's kind of weird, and then there's like a really weird cringy sex scene, and there's only one other like that. It's all common. I've said it before, I'll say it again. I'm not a fan of sex scenes in books, and I just feel like I don't know if it's intentional or not, but so many authors just make it so awkward, and this is no exception with some of the descriptions and language used during the scenes. Literally, the first paragraph of this book ends with this sentence. Let me open it really quick. This is the last sentence in the first paragraph of chapter 1. Summer had barely begun, and already the city of Janloon was like a spent lover, sticky and fragrant. And so, with starting out with that, and like 40 pages in, you get, cringy sex scene. I'm like, oh great, there's going to be a lot of this. I hope there's not a ton more, but there really were only 2 scenes like that, so it's not the end of the world. Then it's not like I'm going to just completely stop reading a book if it has, that kind of content, but it's just not my favorite thing to read. And I just feel like it's always awkward, and so many authors do that and make it awkward, so there's kind of that. My only other critique that I specifically do want to mention, and it's funny because it's a critique, but at the same time it shows how strong some of the world building in this book was. Especially in the first half of this book, I kept thinking to myself, man, I want to read a story about what you're telling me happened in the past. Because you keep referencing these events of like this guerrilla war with the Jade warriors fighting and like having people hide them in the city so that they can keep fighting against the Shatarian army that's trying to take them over. A lot of the things like that. I'm like, this sounds really, really interesting. And it's like some of the other stories, I'm like, I felt like I would rather read that. So, granted, that's not great for me to be thinking that in the first half of the book, but at the same time, it's because the world building was strong. And like I said, the second half of the book did pull me in more. But yeah, this really is doing a lot of world building. And so that would be something I really want to hamper on. If you're going in and you're expecting just nonstop action, you are absolutely not going to get that in Jade City. It's my understanding that's more Jade War, that you'll get it then. But this is more of a slower to an extent, but very intentionally taking time to set everything into motion is what this feels like to me. So it's not too much. I've definitely read books that did more world building, but that's always kind of a fine line to walk. When you're trying to set up something big, you need to put a lot in the first book, but you also need to make sure that there's enough going to make people want to continue, and I felt like this book did a pretty good job of it. It did a lot of the world building, and it also got me interested toward the end with it. But this really, like I said, overall, I did enjoy this. It really wasn't quite what I was expecting. Also, all the people who mentioned martial arts, like, not really. Like, there's fighting, and there's, like, I guess some aspects of that, but there's not a ton. And we don't focus a whole lot on how Jade is actually used. Jade is talked about, and this is something where I feel like actually it'd be mixed reactions, because some people hate this Sandersonization of magic systems where it's got to be explained like a science, and other people enjoy that. This kind of falls in the middle, where partway through the book too, it's actually referred to in a scientific way, where it's talking about like biologically why it works, which I thought was interesting, and it was a little unexpected to get more information on that. It completely fit with what was going on with the story, and that's where, like I said, it's setting up more. But we kind of learn about these different parts, and a lot of them we learn on the fly. We don't sit and stop and learn about it. I assume, as we get more fighting, there'll be a lot more specifics with that. But there wasn't a ton, and I mean, this is a world that people are fighting with Jade, and they're still fighting with, like, special knives and stuff, but they also have guns and, can shoot people and do stuff like that too. And so it's kind of a mix. I'll be interested to see how the whole warfare part really works in the second book to be here. But this did, I think, like I said, it still definitely has the gangster feel, but there's more to it too. It's building up a lot more. That's like the centerpiece, but there's a ton more happening on the outside as well. But really, those were my thoughts on Jade City by Fonda Lee, Book 1 in the Greenbone Saga. Let me know if you agree or disagree with my take or anything that I said in this video. Always interested to hear. Like I said, I was hoping that I didn't end up having to say oh my gosh, I hate this and complain about it. I'd have all the fans be really mad, especially since it won the voting. So, like I said, pleasantly surprised. I did like the book. I wasn't crazy about it, but I'm interested enough to continue for sure. So we'll have to see where it goes. But yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comments. And I'll be interested to see what everyone has to say. And if anybody's like, oh yeah, it definitely is in book 2 or book 3, or if my prediction on the titles is correct too, it'll be interesting to find out. So that's kind of that. Make sure to give the video a like if you enjoyed it. And of course, check the link in the description for the Wizardly Duo Discord if you want to chat this book, other books, really anything at all. It is a ton of fun, and we would love to have you. And of course, if you enjoy my content, make sure to subscribe.